Our program today, we have a very distinguished and very important guest, Ms. Claire. And Claire is a PhD student. She's a PhD candidate in art history and ecology in Columbia University, and she specializes in medieval art and identities and faiths in medieval Mediterranean. I hope, am I correct? And and we're very glad to have her here. I don't know if, okay. Anyways, I'm Steha, and I will just be moderating the program, and Ms. Claire would be doing more of the talking, and she'll be presenting you, and we're going to be listening. And I hope you guys have a very good thing. And Claire, can you go on? Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for the invitation. Let's see if I can share my slides. Just give me 1 second. All right. Now, is that all full screen for you? Can you all see that? Oh,
yes, sure.
You can. Okay, great. And I'm just going to test if I change the slides, will it cooperate? It does. Okay.
Yes.
So thank you. All right. So if we are all set on the tech, I just want to start by thanking you all for having me. I'm very honored to be here with Hayaan Heritage, and I'm so excited to share my work with you today. And I hope that some of it will be useful to your own work and that we can stay in touch. So my presentation will examine some of the foreign interventions in Mogadishu's built environment over the past century and raise a question about what this means for Somali heritage in general. And I should start by saying that most of my research actually focuses on interaction between Christian and Islamic societies in the medieval Mediterranean. So it's rather distant from modern Somalia. And I also investigate how history is mobilized over time in contemporary political discourse. For example, when the Crusades are evoked today to represent conflict between East and West, so to speak. So I had to learn more about the Cathedral of Mogadishu, pictured on the left here, when I first heard about it. You might already know that it was constructed in the 1920s, but its design is modeled on the 12th century Cathedral of Cefalù, which is located in northwest Sicily in Italy. This connection between the medieval and the modern churches had never been fully explained before, so I wanted to understand why the Italian colonizers in Somalia had selected that specific medieval monument as their reference. And I'll present some of my discoveries in what follows. On the right part of this slide, you might recognize a more recent mosque that was constructed in Mogadishu a few years ago, which is built in a neo-Ottoman style. And on social media, I saw a lot of diverse reactions to it. Some people celebrated it as an important landmark that enhanced Mogadishu's status as a world capital. But at the same time, others felt that the design did not adequately reflect Somali identity, but instead was imposing a Turkish style onto the city. And for me, these two buildings represent a century of Mediterranean presence in the Horn of Africa, and specifically in Mogadishu. And I think these examples offer a really interesting perspective on how foreign investments and influence in the capital city help shape the urban landscape. And as you know, plenty of other countries are also involved in Somalia and the Horn of Africa more broadly. For example, the Mosque of Islamic Solidarity is a testament to that, and its construction was sponsored by Saudi Arabia in the 80s, and I've heard that its renovation was recently funded by a Turkish nonprofit, and maybe some of you in the room know more about that than I do. But these religious monuments raise pressing questions about what these landmarks represent for the city and the nation. And moving forward, it also questions what kinds of architecture will be useful in representing the identity of Mogadishu and celebrating the heritage that has been there for centuries. And so what appears at first to be a question of just aesthetics or architectural style has much higher stakes, in my opinion, as these buildings are also representations of geopolitical forces that are trying to shape not just the appearance of a city, but also the trajectory of a nation. So in what follows, I'll explore these issues by focusing on the visual politics of the modern Mediterranean in Mogadishu, because that is what aligns with my own expertise. So I'll start with the Cathedral of Mogadishu. On the left, you can see what it looked like decades ago. And on the right, you can see the Cathedral of Cefalù, which inspired its design. The Cathedral of Mogadishu was once said to be the largest church in Africa and across the Indian Ocean. And in 1928, it was mostly finished and consecrated. Even though it was an important representation of the Italian Empire, the building was hardly studied by scholars. And I wanted to know more about it since medieval Sicily is my main area of research here on the map. And I wanted to understand why the colonial authorities had decided on this particular design, which crossed hundreds of years and thousands of miles to connect medieval Italy with modern Somalia. The Cathedral of Mogadishu is also really interesting because when we look at other cathedrals that were built in the Italian colonies around the same time, you can see that the styles are really different. These cathedrals on the left and in the middle are also medieval in appearance, but they used styles that are associated with northern Italy rather than the south. So you can see the brickwork, you might be able to make out the octagonal domes in the background, the gabled facades, among other characteristics. So the Cathedral of Mogadishu is therefore really unusual because it instead pursued this Sicilian example, and we should ask what inspired that decision. So I was able to make some discoveries that I recently published in 2 articles, and I would be happy to share those with you if you are interested. Almost 3 years ago, I found the answers to my questions in the archive of the Consolata missionaries in Rome, who occupied Somalia from 1924 until 1930. And now I'm going to share some of the main findings from that archive. These are the most important figures in the archive. The cathedral was designed by architect Antonio Vandone, pictured on the left, who was based in the city of Turin or Torino. We don't know who originally decided to follow this medieval Sicilian model for the cathedral, and maybe it was the architect himself, but it was ultimately selected by the governor of Somalia, Cesare Maria De Vecchi, who's pictured in the middle. De Vecchi was a really complicated political figure because he was close to Mussolini, but he had fallen out of favor, and he was sent to Somalia as a sort of punishment that would keep him away from the center of power in Rome. As a result, he was desperate to make a big impact during his time as governor, which unfortunately brought harsher rule to Somalia. And when he arrived in Somalia at the end of 1923, he immediately initiated plans to build a massive cathedral. But at the same time, critics thought that this was a very impractical project because the cathedral's large size was disproportionate to its small Catholic community, especially considering the Somali resistance to conversion, meaning that the numbers of Catholics were not going to increase. His decision to build this large cathedral deeply worried our 2 other protagonists pictured on the right, the Perlo brothers, Filippo and Gabriele, who were missionaries in Kenya and Somalia, respectively. Filippo eventually became the Consolata's superior general, and he moved back to Italy, while Gabriele, in the lower right, was the missionary in Mogadishu overseeing the cathedral. And the letters that they wrote to each other between Italy and Somalia provide most of the information about the construction process. And they were very anxious about mission work in Somalia in general due to a lack of resources and support and local opposition. And they were also very worried that the mission might not survive. So the cathedral became ever more important because it would be a symbol of their success, or if it didn't work out, it would be a symbol of their failure. Interestingly, before they decided on the Sicilian design, other proposals took diverse forms, some of which were not medieval at all. And in fact, most of the conversations between De Vecchi and the missionaries focused on the logistical and financial challenges of the project rather than considerations of style. And so this here is just one other proposal for the cathedral, which followed the model of the Spanish colonizers in the Americas. Here, the architect advocated for what was, in his words, the extreme simplicity of the fortress churches built in New Spain in the Americas, as he argued that they could be constructed without much expertise and would be an appropriate adaptation to what he called inhospitable lands. And so we see competing medieval and early modern proposals for the modern era. And these are just some of the other drawings found in the archive, which suggest that Northern Italian styles were also considered, but the authorities in Somalia ultimately decided to pursue a unique path. Even though the Cathedral of Mogadishu wasn't an exact replica, the missionaries and the press made this connection explicit and often mentioned it in their publications. And you can see some of the similarities in their facades. So their entrances both have this portico with 3 arches, and they're flanked by these 2 projecting square bell towers that have small windows. And on the top, they have these crenellated second stories of smaller dimensions. And now to explain why this Sicilian Cathedral of Cefalù was chosen, we have to go back 800 years to the 12th century. The Cathedral of Cefalù was founded by the Norman king, Roger II, in the year 1131 AD. And even though it had no cultural connection to Somalia whatsoever, it was still chosen for its quote-unquote Arab qualities, which I'm going to explain in a moment. From the perspective of the colonizers, these Arab characteristics were interpreted as Islamic, and therefore they were seen as synonymous with Somalia's Muslim population. And to understand this somewhat crazy comparison, we have to quickly review the history of medieval Sicily. So over the centuries, Sicily underwent occupations by the Byzantine Empire, then the Akhlibids based in North Africa, followed by the Fatimids and the Calibids, and then finally the Normans came from what is now France and conquered the island. And this made the island a central participant in cultural exchange. And when the Normans arrived, the island had belonged to Islamic Emirates for more than 250 years. And therefore, a large portion of Sicily's population was Muslim. And so the island was very much a part of the Islamic world. And this is reflected in its architecture, in its poetry, and so on. And this local context provided plenty of source material for the Normans to adapt in their own building projects and other artistic works. So when the Normans inherited that legacy, they constructed buildings that blended North African, Byzantine, and other visual languages that were found around the island, but also across the Mediterranean. And so the term Arab Norman is an imperfect one that attempts to describe that complex style, which is often reduced to a combination of Christian and Islamic elements, which eventually became very useful for the Italian colonizers. And we can see this style in the bell towers of the Cathedral of Cefalù. So for example, here you can see one of the Cefalù bell towers, and on the right is the Cathedral of Mogadishu for reference. And in between, I've added examples of minarets in North Africa and Al-Andalus in what is now Spain. Now, some of these have been modified over time, but you can hopefully see the general similarity in shape and composition. These are rectangular towers with the smaller piece on top. They have small windows and so on and so forth. And these kinds of connections gave this architectural style a so-called Arab Norman identity because it was thought to combine both cultures. And this is just one of many examples of the ways in which the Normans incorporated Islamic architecture, but also Muslim artisans, intellectuals, and communities more broadly into their kingdom. That kind of integration is often interpreted as a sign of tolerant governance, even though the society was far from equal. But this idea of tolerance is really key to both the medieval project and to the modern cathedral. Now, hundreds of years later in Somalia, the missionaries believed that this particular shape would, in their words, impose itself further upon the local population and adapt to Somalia's quote unquote Oriental environment and style. And they're obviously working with a prejudiced and monolithic understanding of the Islamic world when they associate modern Somalia with the medieval Mediterranean. As they were working on this design, however, it becomes clear that what they would call an Oriental style had its limits. So what I found was that at one point, there was another design that is now lost, but it was apparently rejected because they said it was too much like a mosque. And that led to the selection of this Arab Norman cathedral as an alternative. So there's a really interesting kind of balance between wanting to create a physically impressive monument, but at the same time, the colonial authorities were trying to design a church that somehow bridged Christian and Islamic cultures to appeal to the local Muslim population. And of course, this was not a genuine gesture of tolerance, but rather it was an attempt to advance the colonial project as smoothly as possible. And so the missionaries themselves even said that they wanted the design to, quote, impress the locals and make them finally understand that not only do Italians have a religion, but that the Catholic religion, the only true one, is so superior to Islam in holiness and beauty of doctrine, just as our churches surpass their mosques in beauty and majesty, unquote. And so I bring this up because it shows how the style of the cathedral was designed to really aggressively embody the eventual triumph of Catholicism and the conversion of the colony, not unlike how medieval Sicily's Muslim population came to be ruled by the Christian Normans. And alongside these evocations of conquest, the Consolata missionaries acknowledged that Islam was an essential component of Somali identity. And so they knew that this was an aggressive stance to take. The cathedral was therefore a critical part of a larger system that was intended to strike the core of local communities and their faith. And as we know today, they were not successful. The archive also reveals a lot of information about the construction process, and I was personally surprised by all of the challenges that the Italians encountered as they tried to build this massive monument. All of the machinery and the equipment and much of the building materials were shipped from Italy. And there are many instances where machines broke down and they had to wait for months for parts or replacements to arrive on steamships. They had to delay the consecration of the cathedral because the project was always running behind schedule, and they were also short on funding to finish the job. They also sent a lot of workers from Italy to Somalia, and the cathedral was celebrated for being an Italian construction. However, Somali laborers were once called, quote, a grand secret for the quick pace of work. And so even though the press coverage and other public announcements about the cathedral tend to focus on the Italians who were in charge, there are glimpses of Somali stories recorded as well. So pictured on the left is a photocopied record from 1925 to 1926, and inside it lists the names of both Italian and Somali workers who built the cathedral. It also notes that prisoners worked on the sites, but it doesn't say who these people were, though it appears that they were prisoners of war from the Italian expansion campaigns in the Horn of Africa. And on the right, you can see a photo of some of these workers. And this documentation is one of the first examples, I believe, and it might be the only archival example to date, that attests to coerced labor in the capital, which corresponds with evidence of similar practices that scholars have already found in agricultural production outside of the city. And I just wanted to show that these are some of the names that I found in the archive, which I published last year. The names are sometimes difficult to read in the original documents because they were transcribed using Italian spelling. So it's difficult to recover all of the information from them because that information simply was not recorded. But this is nevertheless a really important testament to the Somali contribution to this difficult colonial monument. And here are a few more photos from the construction site. So in the end, the cathedral was actually unfinished when it was consecrated on March 1st, 1928, in the presence of the Italian Crown Prince Umberto. There are many anecdotes about the rush to finish before he arrived, including that the governor, Deveki, is said to have fired a number of government employees, and apparently he suspended all other construction in the colony for 3 months in order to fund the cathedral leading up to its inauguration. And he reportedly shouted at the missionary Gabriele Perlo that he had invested so much so much in it, yelling that it was all for you missionaries, that it could have led to Deveki's imprisonment. Make of that what you will. But despite this frenzy, the consecration of the cathedral proceeded with all the pomp and circumstance, and the Archbishop of Constantia, Pietro Pisani, included the following declaration in his remarks. And here, just one more photo. The Archbishop said, "Here is the greater meaning of this monument, erected in defiance of the centuries. It is not thirst for dominion, not greed for riches, but an affirmation of Italy's right to cooperate with other peoples in the peaceful conquests of the civilization that thrives in the shadow of the cross," unquote. And though he doesn't directly mention the Sicilian origins of the church's design, he still alludes to the supposed tolerance of the Norman kingdom, which was also described as a peaceful conquest at the time. Pisani's celebration of peace conveniently overlooks the realities of occupation and the militaristic elements of the prince's visit, which began by blessing the flag of the colonial troops. And the cathedral's consecration was immediately followed by the inauguration of the monument for Italians who died fighting in East Africa. And finally, before the prince left the colony, 34 Somali orphans were baptized in his presence, and he was named their godfather. The oldest was a 15-year-old boy named Omar, the son of a Somali soldier who died in a battle to expand Italian occupation, which further contradicts this narrative of peaceful conquest. And it really exposes the point that this is a difficult chapter of a painful colonial history, not a symbol of tolerance or coexistence. And I think this really drives home why this building is so controversial. And so through this first part of my presentation, I wanted to demonstrate how the cathedral's construction and its very design were closely tied to the colonial project. Its so-called Arab Norman style participated in a larger network of visual languages and historical references that undergirded this modern occupation in diverse and often contradictory ways. By compressing time and space in the service of empire, the history of medieval Sicily provided precedent for the modern colony of Somalia and the Catholic mission, stretching the bounds of the Mediterranean to the Horn of Africa. Just as the medieval Norman kingdom took over Sicily from their Muslim predecessors, the colonizers in Somalia wanted to symbolically continue that legacy. And with all of this history now uncovered, I think it's interesting to consider what the cathedral's ruins could become in the 21st century. Some architects, such as Yusuf Shego, have suggested the site could become a symbol of religious tolerance, representing how different cultures and faiths are welcome in Somalia. And before this can be possible, I think it's necessary to address the cathedral's painful past and the ideology that informed its construction. And it's actually sort of ironic that the concept of tolerance was weaponized by the Italians first, who used this Arab Norman design with the hope that their colonial mission would emulate the supposedly tolerant rule of the Norman kings of Sicily. And now the same cathedral could come to represent tolerance in an independent Somalia. And so I think that's a possible reinterpretation of the site, but there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll see what the future holds. I think it's also relevant to mention that in other parts of the world, especially in Italy, the same period of medieval history is still used today to celebrate examples of tolerance and coexistence, usually with the goal of supporting inclusion and understanding. For example, in 2015, 9 Arab Norman monuments were inscribed on the World Heritage List, exalting this inheritance as what they called a model of European multicultural identity. Around the same time, the former mayor of Palermo, Leo Luca Orlando, on the right, memorably gestured to the cities and buildings in the city when advocating for the rescue of migrants at sea, explaining that Sicily had a history of absorbing people who he called outsiders. And so while this history is still framed in Eurocentric terms, it at least gestures to a desire for community and coexistence. However, the Cathedral of Mogadishu shows us how these same Mediterranean stories can be used to serve modern European interests under the guise of cooperation or collaboration. And we continue to see similar narratives advance today. It's apparent in examples such as the Med-Or Italian Foundation, which stands for Mediterranean Orient, and this organization was established in 2021 by the defense company Leonardo. Interestingly, the foundation considers the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea to be part of the Mediterranean, which I find to be a little suspicious personally. My understanding is that this organization is responsible for new Italian cultural programming in Somalia, according to research by Iman Mohammed. Such articulations of Mediterranean connections tend to reveal modern positionalities and prejudices under the guise of seemingly neutral cultural or geographical terms. And so while we can talk about historical connections between the Mediterranean and East Africa, or look to these past stories of coexistence and exchange, we also have to attend to the ways in which many of these narratives just so happen to support or perhaps even replicate past colonial dynamics. And I would argue that other historical references often accomplish similar aims. And now that we're in the present moment, I want to return to the Republic of Turkey because the country is one of the largest foreign presences in Somalia today. And this reality seems to be changing the urban landscape of Mogadishu. I'll briefly introduce two examples that I am thinking about now, but I would be really interested to hear your thoughts on this topic rather than my own. Following the 2016 renovation of the medieval Arbara Rukun Mosque in Mogadishu, pictured here, the scholar Nuruddin Haji Shikay asked whether it was a restoration to remember the past or to be forgotten. As I think you all well know, the mosque is one of the oldest monuments in the heart of the Somali capital. It has existed at least since the 7th century Hijriya or the 13th century AD. Of course, this mosque and other historic mosques in the city recall the importance and the wealth of Mogadishu in the past. And it's also testament to the wider networks of exchange that connected the city and the rest of the known world. The material manifestations of this history in monuments like this mosque are increasingly threatened, and they are not only being lost to time, but new developments and aggressive renovations are compromising the unique characteristics of this historic architecture. The renovation of the mosque covered its interior with ceramic Iznik-style tiles, concealing the monument beneath a modern Turkish veneer based in somewhat Ottoman aesthetics. Such disregard for the mosque's historical features detracts from the surviving evidence of Mogadishu's significance and the architecture that developed from that specific context. This work did not preserve the ogee arches of the previous mihrab and niche mimbar, which you can see on the left here, which had existed at least since the 1990s, nor did the new design seek to emulate a Somali or Swahili style of mihrab, which we often find in other examples along the coast. Instead, the renovation turned these features into simplified rounded arches. And in the face of such losses, Shikay remarked that the monument's identity was changed into something like a Turkish mosque, which forgets the past rather than remembering it. The renovation is only one result of the growing investment in Somalia on the part of Turkish entities through the coordination of state institutions and non-governmental organizations. The Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasizes that Turkish-Somali relations date back to the Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman legacies have been used to represent modern Turkish foreign policy, as well as some of the architectural work they've done in Somalia. But not unlike the Italian cathedral, the constructed Ottoman architectural vocabulary provides historical legitimation for the modern relationships between the two states, and it leverages an imperial legacy. However, unlike European powers, the Ottoman legacy did not leave such a direct colonial imprint or the associated baggage in Somalia. Nevertheless, the power structures sustained through Turkish investments sometimes parallel those once perpetuated by the European colonizers. Viewed alongside the Turkish presence in North and East Africa, it seems that the country is trying to increase its presence in the Mediterranean and through the Red Sea into Somalia. And these architectural interventions can be interpreted as a representation of their attempts to do so. Of course, this phenomenon should not be understood, or let me rephrase that. It should be understood as an exchange rather than a one-directional imposition. And so I finally returned to the Ottoman Revival Mosque that was built in Mogadishu through local private investment rather than Turkish funding. And while this was a Somali initiative to my understanding, it was constructed using materials and labor largely sourced from Turkey. Together, these architectural projects reveal how Mediterranean powers, both past and present, have influenced Mogadishu's built environment, not only through physical interventions, but also through the propagation of visual languages and legacies that are now being reinterpreted and repurposed in Somalia in local terms. And of course, this phenomenon occurs around the world, and it's as old as time itself. And it prompts the difficult and perhaps unanswerable question of how one might define Somali heritage versus what is considered to be Turkish or what is ascribed to any other identity. These monuments and the forces that drove their construction have far-reaching implications for how we understand Somali architecture, heritage, and even sovereignty. They are only two layers in a much longer history of trade and power relations in which the Horn of Africa has always been a central part. In light of Mogadishu's rapid changes, these buildings beg the question of how Somali architecture should be defined and protected today, and whether such definitions should include these relatively direct appropriations of Mediterranean architecture. And I think I am certainly not the person to answer those questions, but I think that the people in this virtual room definitely are. So I hope that some of my research might be useful to you as you work through these issues. And I really appreciate the invitation to join you today. That's all I have to present, and I would be happy to support your work in any way that I can. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claire. We've listened to it, and everything about it was, I'm sure I'm going to use that. I'm going to use every information you've input out there. And I have questions for you, some from me and some from others. I don't know. I'm going to start with the ones from me that I've written down. So the first question was, if restoration was considered, would that be seen as preserving history or reviving a painful symbol? For the Somalis, I mean, like the locals.
Of course, and I think it's such an important question and such a difficult question to answer. I would say, as someone who is not Somali, I should not be the one answering that question. But what I have seen through conversation with Somali scholars, both those who live and work in Somalia, but also those in the diaspora, is that there is a fairly diverse range of opinions about this building. So I've seen some people who have such negative memories associated with it that they don't want to see any part of the cathedral left in the city. They feel that it doesn't reflect the needs of the community. And if you were to renovate or restore that building, why would you put those resources in a colonial monument as opposed to another part of the community, which is really by and for the local people? On the other hand, I have seen members of the diaspora who have visited the ruins or, posted about the ruins online, who feel that it can be the symbol of not only tolerance, but also maybe resilience, to remember the fact that this colonial period did happen and that Somalia exists today as an independent nation and has, sort of moved on from this past. Again, I'm not the one who has to live next to that cathedral every day, so I want to be very respectful of the feelings of those who do. I would hope that at least the remains of that cathedral could be documented very carefully. Maybe samples of the materials could be collected so that scholars can look at them and consult them later. But I do truly believe that whatever happens to that building has to be decided by a consensus among the local community there and perhaps the diaspora as well. Oh, I think you're muted.
Okay, I'm very sorry.
That always happens. No worries.
Thank you very much for the answer. One more question. How does the presence of both mosques and colonial charges in Mogadishu complicate the narrative of the city's identity?
I don't know if it's complicated just by its mere presence, but I think it does really effectively represent these layers of history, and it forces us to grapple with those layers and decide what we're going to do with them. And by we, it's not so much myself included in that, but again, I'm speaking about the local community. One thing that I find really interesting, and I wonder if you can actually see it in this slide, you can. So you can see right here, there's the Cathedral of Mogadishu, and I hope my, let's see.
The final picture. Right now we see the
I'm trying to see. Oh, here's my cursor. So you can see the cathedral here, and you can see Arba Rukun right here. And so they are, as some of you already know, they are visible. When you are looking at one, you can also look at the other. And the missionaries actually were very cognizant of that when they were designing the city plan and building the cathedral. They often pictured the two monuments next to one another. And the idea was that the bell towers of the cathedral would rise above the mosque's minaret as a sort of claim to superiority. And so I think, again, when you're grappling with these particular monuments and what should be done with them, it's really hard to avoid that reality and the fact that the city was literally constructed to create this sense of colonial superiority. And so I don't know if that fully answers your question, but those are the sorts of themes that I think have to be worked through, is what do you do when you're left with this very visible legacy while you're trying to define a nation, right? And again, I don't know, but if I can help provide information to help people have those conversations, I'm happy to do so.
You did do fine. You did give a lot of information. Thank you very much. Now I'm passing to the questions from the people. Let's start with the one that's written down here first. It says, do you think Mogadishu's architectural history has been overlooked because it does not fit neatly into common Islamic or European categories?
I would say that is true. Now, there are certainly scholars who are working on the Islamic architecture of the Swahili coast, of the Sultanate of Zanzibar, and so on. So people are doing that work. But I do think historically there have been challenges, especially once the Civil War started, of having physical access to these monuments, to study them, and to publish work about them. And so I think just unfortunately the realities of the war made it quite difficult to tell these histories. That said, there are, of course, people who remember these buildings, who live with these buildings every day, who know these buildings very well. And so I think when I'm talking about the difficulties, it's not so much the difficulties of the local community per se, but rather of an international scholarly community who have often put their priorities somewhere else. And I think I also see that with the study of the cathedral. I said at the beginning that a lot of people had never conducted a full study of this particular monument. And I think one of the reasons why is, again, the physical accessibility of the site to foreign researchers. I think another one is that if you are a historian of modern architecture, traditionally, scholars might gravitate toward the more modernist buildings, while the Cathedral of Mogadishu is a neo-medieval structure, and its design is not as original, let's say, because it was intentionally a copy. And I think that has generally been less attractive if you're following the common standards of art historical research, which is to seek out originality, which is to seek out innovation, and so on and so forth. So some of these buildings have slipped through the cracks, so to speak. And I think it's so important to go back and pay attention to them, even if they are colonial, even if maybe on the surface they haven't always attracted the attention that they deserve. But it's so exciting to see what Hayaan Heritage is doing, what the Somali Architecture Collective has been doing to make sure that people know, not just in Mogadishu, where this is a day-to-day part of life in the city, but rather people around the world know what these buildings are and will pay more attention to them.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Hayaan Heritage is quite focused on that. We've been trying to output whatever information we have about our country and the history we have. And I think we're trying a lot. It might not be where we wanted to be yet, but we're on the way.
Well, it's a slow process, but it's such an important one. And I think you all are doing an excellent job, if I may say so.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The next question is, when looking at the Cathedral of Mogadishu, should we see it purely as a symbol of colonialism or as a part of the city's layered history? I think it's connected to that question, but yeah.
It is, right. I think it's such an important question to return to and to keep asking. And again, like I said, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had within the community itself. I do think that it is an important monument to at least remember and record, but whether or not you refurbish it or maintain it in some way is an open question. And I do think, we can say something is colonial or not. We can say something is an imposition or not. One thing that I find really interesting about this particular cathedral is that it was sort of supposed to be seen as a compromise between Christian and Islamic communities. Now, certainly it was not truly a compromise, but I think it's really unique in the sense that the missionaries were trying to think, well, how do we insert ourselves and impose ourselves in a society that is overwhelmingly Muslim? And they did make accommodations to do that, at least, on the most superficial surface level. I'm not saying that this was a genuine accommodation at all, but it does at least offer a very interesting case study of colonial building. I'm not saying, though, that is something that we need to, remember in a physical way, but rather perhaps it's just one for scholars to study and to remember.
Yeah, you're correct there. I have another question for you. It's very contradictory. They said you mentioned peaceful conquest. So my question is there peaceful conquest? Is there something called this peaceful conquest? And when one is taking over someone's land and culture, if yes, define peaceful conquest in your own view.
A great question. I would say no, there is no such thing as peaceful conquest. And so I hope that the presentation at least started to shed light and expose that contradiction. And in my articles, I have more space to really delve into and complicate that particular claim. So again, I would be happy to share those with you if you would like to read them. Really what peaceful conquest was a narrative that colonial powers, not just Italy, but also France, for example, used to justify their colonial expansion. And particularly under De Vecchi in Somalia, the process was anything but peaceful. There were war crimes committed shortly after he arrived. And in fact, he was so brutal that there was actually criticism of him published in the Italian press back home within, I think, the first year of his governorship. So again, the cathedral was made to represent this narrative of peaceful conquest, but of course it was anything but.
Thank you very much. I hope that answers the question. And here another question is, I think it may have mixed up the question, sorry. Okay, it says, during the building of the cathedral, the workers and the architect, were they local or were they from outside?
So from what I can recover from the archive itself, the architect and the people who oversaw the construction of the cathedral were all Italians who had come from Italy to either support the mission or to support the physical construction. And then they needed more labor because Somalia, among the Italian colonies, was not the most populated. It was, of course, the most distant colony for the Italians. So there weren't that many people there to help build these projects. So then they resort to local labor. And it seems like this was a mix of Somali workers who were hired, but they were not paid the same amount as the Italians, which is not surprising. And on top of that, there were prisoners who, again, seem to have been taken from these expansion campaigns under Deveki, and apparently they were forced to work on the cathedral. So that's some of the information that I have. It's not a comprehensive record just because I could only work with the documents that survive. And of course, those documents are all from the colonizers' perspective. But they do at least tell on themselves, where we do have these records where they're writing in the ledgers. You know, we had 30 prisoners work on the cathedral today. And even if we don't know exactly who those prisoners were, it at least gives us some indication that this was not purely Italian as they liked to claim it was, but it also was not something where, you know, this idea of peaceful conquest was true or valid, but rather people were being forced to work on this site.
I mean, very understandable because it's colonial period. What do you expect?
Right.
Anyone else who has a question, you can write them down. We're not just reading the ones that are sent privately, we're also reading the ones that are written down here. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and write it down. And as we go on, how did architecture, yeah? Is someone talking?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. If anyone wants to talk also, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and I'll give you the mic. Please feel free to do that. Don't just write it down. We want you guys to also talk and ask whatever questions you have. The next question is, which one was I reading? How did architecture shape everyday life in the city of Mogadishu during its peak years?
That's a great question. And it's one that I wish we had more published oral histories about. So I would actually, you know, ask your families, for example, and try to get more of that information out there because I would love to read it. One thing that I've noticed, again, from the colonial perspective, I'm mostly working on a colonial archive here, is that the Italians were very deliberate in looking at juxtapositions between their architecture and the architecture that already existed in Mogadishu. And so, like I said, the cathedral and the mosque were meant to create this juxtaposition that ultimately flattered the colonial architecture more than the local architecture. But there's actually also sort of a weird or interesting anecdote that at least struck my interest about a tennis court that the Italians had built somewhere in the city. And we should talk more about this at some point if anybody is interested. But they had built this tennis court. And there's this one sentence where somebody says that the people, you know, shouting during these tennis matches actually interfered with the call to prayer of a nearby mosque. And that to me was so interesting because it's, again, this very problematic juxtaposition of European sports and local religious practice. And they are intentionally looking at how the colonial culture is interfering with local culture and practice. So I think those are, again, just two examples that I have as an outsider reading the colonial archive, but it's definitely something that I would love to discuss more. And I think the Somali Architecture Collective that I mentioned also would be really interested in consolidating that information and hopefully sharing it with a larger audience.
We would like to talk about the tennis court, one thing I'm sure.
Yes, yeah. Maybe we can find, you know, part of it somewhere or figure out where it was. I'd be very curious to see.
I would be in contact, and we'll also be in contact to talk about this. I would love this. Whoever wants to also talk about it.
Yes,
and
everyone can
yeah. Hayaan Heritage, you had a question? I think you had a question?
Thank you, Nasteexa and Claire. I don't have a question, but when were talking about the history of the building of the cathedral, I remembered a myth about that building. Because people used to say the cathedral was built sand cemetery cement with milk, not water. So that's why it was hard to destroy. Because during the Civil War, the religious fanatics tried to destroy the cathedral, but they were not able to destroy it. So there were very myth about it, saying it was built with milk. So that's why it was very hard. I was trying to add that myth. So let's give the others if they have a question or any other comment. Thank you again, Clara and Naseha, for your time.
Thank you so much. That's a really fascinating anecdote. And again, I think it goes back to the importance of collecting this information. And who knows, maybe it's true. And we could maybe look at some of the remains of the cathedral to see what exactly it was made out of. If I can just add, I found it so interesting that the Italians were insistent on importing so much of the material and also the machinery in order to build this cathedral. So they weren't using a lot of local building practices to my knowledge, but maybe we could find something more if we looked at the ruins in a systematic way. But that's a really fascinating anecdote. So I think there's a lot more to say there.
Yeah, yeah. So there's one question here. It says, Claire, since you're not a Mogadishu local, if you had to choose one building that would represent modern Mogadishu story and architecture, which one would you choose and why?
Oh, that is a difficult question. And I think I need to travel there with all of you so that you can take me on a tour and I can have a better answer to this. But as someone who studies the Middle Ages, for me, I'm very attached to these historical mosques. And so I know that's not necessarily a representation of modern Mogadishu, but I think that they are such a beautiful representation of the cultural exchange and the longstanding roots that remain in the city. And so I think that, the recent renovation of Arba Rukun, in some ways, it at least offers a snapshot of what the future of Mogadishu architecture might be with this Turkish renovation. I kind of hope that's not the case. And I think that the work that you all are doing is getting right to the heart of those concerns, to protect what is there and to imagine what the future can look like that's informed by this local heritage. So not entirely answering your question, because I really do work in like the 12th, 13th centuries. But again, let's keep having the conversation and hopefully I'll see you there one day and I can make a better decision about that question.
We'll see you very soon. We'll be waiting for you there. And first, let's have, I think there's Abdul, what was the name? Babul. Could you go ahead if you have a question? I'm sorry, I couldn't read the name properly. I can't see the name. I'm sorry. Abdullahi Babul. You can go ahead if you have a question. Can you hear me?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, go ahead if you have a question.
I'm sorry, I could not open the mic.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm very interested in this topic. I'm Abdullah Babel. I'm really interested in this. I wanted to ask you a very quick question. Why does it bother some people if Somalia has buildings influenced by other countries, while Somalis themselves have cultural and religious presence around the world?
I think it's a great question, and it doesn't bother everyone from what I've seen and from what I've heard in conversation with others. And so the issue is not so much if there are, let's say, external influences in the city's architecture, but rather how are people protecting the heritage that's there, and how are we ensuring that the local characteristics are also maintained. And so at the end of the presentation, I said that, again, these issues of exchange and of appropriation, these are tales as old as time. And I think that's okay and should be embraced. But I have seen a lot of concern simply about protecting what's already there and building new buildings that respond to that history too. And so I think everything is a balance. And again, it's not my place to determine what that balance is, but I hope that adds some nuance to the conversation, that I want to call attention to the foreign forces that are helping shape the city. But this is not a wholesale condemnation of that, but rather an invitation to look at it a little bit more closely and to help raise questions that might shape where the city is going in the future.
Abdullahi, I have answered your question.
Yeah. That's yeah. I don't get it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anyone else that has a question, or do I move to the next one? We're almost done right now. Anyone else with a question? Okay, Claire, I have a question of my own.
Sure.
Since I do not have any information about the Italian books or articles, I don't have much that I've read. I'm not going to say I did a lot. Like, I didn't do a lot. I might have done a few, but I've not read a lot. But of those of your knowledge that you know of, are there many that have this cathedral, or is there any that this cathedral passes along, like in the articles or the books? Is it mentioned?
It's mentioned with some frequency, just because it's such a prominent monument, it's hard to ignore. But what I found, at least, is that it's usually just mentioned in one sentence. And so I've seen some publications that actually dismiss it. They call it an Arab Norman bulk, for example, or just this thing that was considered somewhat unsightly and, of course, completely, let's say, unresponsive, or it didn't fit into the local context of Mogadishu at all. And so I think it's kind of funny in a dark way, because the missionaries had originally intended for the monument to complement the local environment. And, you know, the past, let's say, 50 years of scholarship, be it Italian or British or wherever else, people look at it as this sort of unsightly, kind of, you know, nonsensical thing that just happened to be built in Mogadishu. So the archival record and the, or really I should say, the record of secondary literature was so thin. And I was just so curious that when I found the archive, I realized that there was a much longer story to be told. So currently the most information that we have about it is in my articles, which again, I'm happy to share. But hopefully more people will do work, not just on this period, but the rest of Somali architecture as well.
I'm guessing it was very hard for you to get the research history when you're trying to find the context. It was hard to find information about this, right?
It did. It took a long time to figure out how things worked in the archive. And then Gabriele Perlo's handwriting is also very bad. So it's just sort of a funny challenge of, you know, reading these letters time and again. And they didn't save everything. And I think, unfortunately, if you were to look at the cathedrals in Libya, for example, which I showed, I'm not sure that the documentation is as thorough. So on the one hand, we're lucky to have the amount of information that we do for Mogadishu, but I think there are still many gaps in the record. The story about using milk in the cement is fascinating. I think there are a lot more stories that people know in the city itself, and we just have to ask them for more details and then hopefully write them down to share them with broader communities. And then, you know, I wrote some articles, but whoever writes the next ones will have even more information.
It would be great to have you there one day, like, in case you just come, you know, just let us know. We'll be showing you around, and we'll be sure to share with you the local stories. I'm sure people have a lot of stories.
Absolutely right. So once you work on something or publish something, let me know, and I'll be happy to share it around. And hopefully I'll invite you for talks as well. So it would be a good collaboration.
I would love that. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that has a question? Because the ones I have here, I know. I don't think there's anyone else with a hand raised. Okay, and it's already time. Thank you very much, Claire. We're very delighted to have you. It was really great talking to you. If you have anything else you would like to add, just go ahead. Mike is yours.
I don't have much. I just want to reiterate my thanks to all of you for the invitation, also for your time and attention. Again, it was an honor for me to be here and share some of this research. And like I said, the story cannot be told without more voices, especially voices in Mogadishu. I know that you all are doing such important work to tell those stories now. And so anything I can do to help share or support, please just let me know. And my email is on the slide if you would like to contact me. So happy to help, and I hope that we'll be talking again soon.
Thank you very much. We'll be contacting you. I'm sure I will be the first person to write you an email because I would love to get, those informations you've written down, the articles. I would like to get them. So I will be texting you, sending you an email.
Yes, please do. Everybody can. So I welcome the emails and I'll keep an eye out for them.
Thank you very much. Abdulhab, do you want to say something? Abdulhab, you there? I think.
Thank you, Clara, for your time, for your useful presentation and insightful. I hope this will be the first presentation, the first webinar of this kind. But we will continue to organize events and webinars like this, and I hope it will be something physical soon. Inside the cathedral, inside some of the historical sites in the city, as we did last year when we organized a preservation of mosques forum in the historical mosque Arba'a Rukn. So it will be first, but it will not be the last. Thank you, Claire, for your time, Mr. You as well, and all fellow guests and who joined us, who accepted our invitation. So I would like to thank you all, you guys, on behalf of Hayaan Heritage, on behalf of Somali community. So have a nice Ramadan, a nice Trawih, a nice morning, you, Clara.
Thank you all so much, and wishing you a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Clara. It was nice to meet you today. And we will be in touch very soon, inshallah, I hope. Thank you to everyone else who's joined, and thank you, Abdulhab, and everyone else. Have a very good night and great Ramadan and a great day to you, Claire.
Yes, you all as well. Take care. Until next time.
Next time. See you guys.
Yes, bye.